In the year 1741, on the northern coast of South America, a clash of empires would take place that would determine the fate of a continent. This was the Battle of Cartagena de Indias, a confrontation between the mighty British Empire and the resilient Spanish forces that has been largely forgotten in the pages of history. But why has such a pivotal event slipped through the cracks? Today, we uncover the story of a siege that changed the course of colonial power in the Americas. By the early 18th century, European empires were in a relentless struggle for global dominance. The Caribbean was a critical battleground where control over lucrative trade routes and colonial possessions could make or break an empire. For Spain, the Americas were the lifeblood of their wealth, providing gold, silver, and other valuable resources. For Britain, expanding its influence in the Caribbean meant undermining Spain's power and securing greater control over Atlantic trade. Tensions between the two empires had been simmering for years, especially over the issue of British merchants' rights to trade in Spanish territories. In 1739, these tensions boiled over when Britain declared war on Spain in what became known as the War of Jenkins' Ear, named after a British captain whose severed ear was presented to Parliament as a symbol of Spanish cruelty. The conflict would soon escalate into a broader war involving most of Europe, but in the Caribbean, it led to one of the most ambitious military campaigns of the era. The British set their sights on Cartagena de Indias, a strategic fortress city on the northern coast of South America. Known as the Jewel of the Indies, Cartagena was a key Spanish stronghold, guarding the entrance to the Spanish Main and protecting the treasure fleets that carried vast riches back to Europe. Capturing Cartagena would be a major blow to the Spanish Empire and give Britain a foothold in the Americas from which to expand its influence. In late 1740, the British began assembling what would become one of the largest naval armadas in history. The fleet consisted of 186 ships, including 29 ships of the line, numerous frigates, sloops, and transports, all commanded by Admiral Edward Vernon. Vernon was an experienced naval officer who had already achieved significant victories in the Caribbean, most notably the capture of Porto Bello in 1739. His success had made him a national hero in Britain, and he was eager to replicate his triumph at Cartagena. Alongside Vernon was General Thomas Wentworth, tasked with leading the land forces. The combined force numbered nearly 30,000 men, including British regulars, American colonial militia, and Jamaican slaves pressed into service. The fleet carried enough provisions to sustain the army for months, along with a staggering amount of artillery, over 2,000 cannons. The mission was clear: capture Cartagena de Indias, seize control of the Caribbean, and deliver a crippling blow to the Spanish Empire. However, despite their overwhelming numbers, the British faced several challenges. The fleet was a logistical nightmare, with coordination between naval and land forces proving difficult. The sheer size of the Armada also made it vulnerable to the region's unpredictable weather. Furthermore, Admiral Vernon and General Wentworth did not see eye to eye. Their strained relationship would become a major hindrance as the campaign progressed. Yet, confident in their superiority, the British believed victory was inevitable. The Armada set sail in early 1741, with expectations running high. Little did they know that they were heading toward one of the most disastrous campaigns in British military history. Cartagena de Indias was no ordinary city. Its defenses were among the strongest in the New World, designed to withstand the fiercest assaults. The city was protected by a series of fortresses and walls, including the imposing San Felipe de Barajas, a massive fortress perched on a hill overlooking the harbor. The walls of Cartagena were thick, the bastions bristling with cannons, and the narrow entrances to the bay were guarded by underwater chains and sunken ships. The man responsible for defending the city was Don Blas de Lezo, a seasoned Spanish admiral whose reputation was as formidable as the city's walls. Known as El Medio Hombre, or half-man, due to the many injuries he had sustained in previous battles, Lezo was a veteran of countless naval engagements. He had lost an arm, a leg, and an eye in battle, but his spirit remained unbroken. Despite his disabilities, Lezo was a brilliant strategist, known for his cunning and tenacity. Lezo understood that Cartagena was the key to Spain's control of the Caribbean, and he was determined not to let it fall. His forces were vastly outnumbered, with only 3,600 men, including local militia, regular soldiers, and a handful of warships. Yet Lezo knew that Cartagena's strength lay in its defenses and the resilience of its people. He had spent years preparing for such an assault, reinforcing the fortifications, and training his men for the inevitable confrontation. As the British fleet approached, Lezo rallied his troops, emphasizing the importance of the battle to the future of the Spanish Empire. He knew that this would be a fight to the death, and he was prepared to sacrifice everything to defend Cartagena. The stage was set for one of the most intense and grueling sieges in colonial history. On March 13, 1741, the British fleet arrived off the coast of Cartagena. The sight was awe-inspiring. Dozens of ships filled the horizon, their sails billowing in the wind. The British wasted no time in beginning their assault. Admiral Vernon ordered his ships to bombard the city, raining cannon fire on the fortifications and trying to weaken the defenses. The noise was deafening as explosions echoed across the bay, and smoke filled the air. For over a week, the British pounded the city with relentless bombardment, hoping to break the spirit of the defenders. Yet, despite the ferocity of the attack, Cartagena's walls held firm. Lezo's men fired back from their fortified positions, targeting the British ships with precision. The Spanish cannons, though fewer in number, were well placed, and they managed to inflict significant damage on the British fleet. Recognizing that a direct naval assault would not be enough, Vernon and Wentworth decided to land troops on the beaches east of Cartagena, aiming to encircle the city and capture the outer defenses. On March 20, 1741, thousands of British soldiers and colonial militia stormed ashore. They quickly seized the small forts of Chamba and San Luis, which guarded the narrow Boca Chica Channel, the entrance to Cartagena's bay. However, as they advanced, the British encountered fierce resistance from the Spanish forces, who used the rugged terrain to their advantage. The swamps and jungles surrounding Cartagena became a deadly obstacle for the British, who were unaccustomed to the harsh environment. Spanish snipers and guerrilla fighters harassed the invaders, picking them off from the dense foliage. The British advance was slow and costly. Disease soon began to take its toll on the British forces. Yellow fever, dysentery, and malaria spread rapidly through the ranks, exacerbated by the sweltering heat and unsanitary conditions. Within weeks, thousands of soldiers were incapacitated, weakening the British offensive. Morale began to waver as the siege dragged on, and the once confident British commanders found themselves facing a determined and resilient enemy. As the weeks passed, the siege of Cartagena devolved into a brutal stalemate. The British, frustrated by their inability to break through the Spanish defenses, grew increasingly desperate. Admiral Vernon and General Wentworth, never fully aligned in their strategy, began to clash openly. Vernon, eager for a swift victory, pressed for a renewed naval bombardment and a direct assault on the city. Wentworth, however, insisted on a more cautious approach, fearing heavy casualties and further disease outbreaks. The lack of clear leadership took a heavy toll on the British forces. Soldiers, weakened by illness and demoralized by the constant fighting, began to lose their will to fight. The sweltering heat, coupled with the tropical rains, turned their camps into quagmires of mud and filth. Supplies began to run low, and the men were forced to endure harsh conditions with little respite. Meanwhile, the Spanish defenders, though outnumbered, remained resolute. Lezo's leadership was crucial in maintaining morale among his troops. He moved swiftly between the fortresses, directing the defense and rallying his men. Despite his injuries, Lezo was a constant presence on the front lines, inspiring his soldiers to hold the line. His clever use of the terrain and fortifications allowed the Spanish to inflict heavy losses on the British, who struggled to make any significant gains. The situation grew increasingly dire for the British. Reinforcements were slow to arrive, and those that did were often already sick. The once mighty British Armada was now bogged down in a grueling war of attrition, far from home and facing an enemy that refused to yield. The dream of a quick and decisive victory had turned into a nightmare of frustration and loss. By mid-April 1741, with their situation growing increasingly desperate, the British commanders decided to risk everything on one final, decisive assault. The target was the fortress of San Felipe de Barajas, the linchpin of Cartagena's defenses. This massive stone fortress, with its thick walls and commanding position on a hill, was considered impregnable. But the British believed that if they could capture San Felipe, the city would fall. On the night of April 19th, under the cover of darkness, General Wentworth led a force of nearly 10,000 men in a direct assault on the fortress. The British hoped to catch the Spanish off guard and overwhelm them with sheer numbers. However, Lezo had anticipated this move and had fortified San Felipe with additional troops and artillery. As the British forces approached, they were met with a hail of musket fire and cannon blasts from the Spanish defenders. The steep, narrow paths leading up to the fortress were turned into killing fields. The British soldiers, laden with heavy equipment, struggled to advance under the withering fire. Lezo's men, entrenched behind thick walls, poured deadly volleys into the ranks of the attackers. Despite their valor, the British assault faltered. The Spanish had constructed a complex network of trenches, barricades, and traps that slowed the British advance to a crawl. Confusion reigned as the British columns became disorganized in the darkness, and panic spread through the ranks. As dawn broke, it was clear that the attack had failed. Hundreds of British soldiers lay dead or wounded at the base of the fortress, while the Spanish defenders had suffered only minimal losses. Realizing the futility of further attacks, General Wentworth ordered a retreat. The British forces withdrew in disarray, their hopes of capturing Cartagena shattered. The final assault on San Felipe had been a disaster, and with it, the British campaign collapsed. The failure of the siege marked the end of Britain's ambitions in the Caribbean, at least for the time being. Over 18,000 British soldiers and sailors had died, most from disease, and the survivors limped back to Jamaica, defeated and demoralized. The once proud British fleet was a shadow of its former self, its ships battered, its men broken. For Britain, the defeat at Cartagena was a humiliating blow, one that they sought to quickly bury in the annals of history. For Spain, the victory was a moment of immense pride. Cartagena de Indias had withstood the greatest military force Britain had ever assembled, thanks to the leadership of Don Blas de Lezo and the courage of the city's defenders. Lezo's brilliant tactics and unyielding resolve had saved the city and preserved Spain's dominance in the Caribbean. Yet, despite his triumph, Lezo received little recognition during his lifetime. He died shortly after the siege, his health deteriorating from the strain of the battle and the wounds he had carried for years. The Battle of Cartagena de Indias remains one of the most significant yet underappreciated events in colonial history. Had the British succeeded, the balance of power in the Americas could have shifted dramatically, potentially altering the course of history. Instead, Spain's hold on its American colonies remained secure for another century. Today, the fortresses of Cartagena still stand as silent witnesses to the siege, a reminder of a battle that changed the fate of nations. The legacy of Don Blas de Lezo, once forgotten, has been revived in recent years as historians have come to recognize his role in one of Spain's greatest victories. Despite its significance, the Battle of Cartagena de Indias has often been overlooked in mainstream history. In Britain, the defeat was an embarrassment, a reminder of a failed campaign that clashed with the narrative of imperial success. The government of the time, eager to maintain morale and focus on other conflicts, downplayed the disaster, and the event faded from public memory. In Spain, while Cartagena's defense was celebrated, the victory was overshadowed by other events in the broader War of Austrian Succession. Moreover, Spain's own decline in the following centuries led to the erosion of interest in its colonial past. The story of Blas de Lezo and the siege became a tale told in whispers, its significance understood only by those who delved deep into the history of the Caribbean. It is only in recent years that the Battle of Cartagena de Indias has begun to receive the recognition it deserves. Historians and scholars have shed new light on the siege, examining its impact on the geopolitical landscape of the 18th century, and its role in shaping the future of the Americas. In Colombia, Blas de Lezo is now honored as a national hero, his name and legacy revived as symbols of resistance and resilience. As we remember the events of 1741, we are reminded that history is often written by the victors, but it is also shaped by those who refuse to surrender. The siege of Cartagena de Indias may have been forgotten by many, but its lessons endure, a testament to the enduring spirit of a city that stood against the might of an empire. Today, Cartagena de Indias is a vibrant city, a UNESCO World Heritage Site that draws visitors from around the world. Its historic center, with its colonial architecture, colorful streets, and towering fortifications, is a living museum of the past. The walls that once withstood the British siege now welcome tourists who come to admire their beauty and learn about the city's storied history. The legacy of the 1741 siege is woven into the fabric of Cartagena. The fortress of San Felipe de Barajas still stands, its massive walls a testament to the battle that saved the city. Visitors can walk through its tunnels, climb its ramparts, and imagine the desperation and determination of those who fought there centuries ago. The statue of Don Blas de Lezo, overlooking the bay, serves as a reminder of the man who defied the odds and secured one of Spain's greatest victories. Cartagena's resilience, born in the fires of battle, continues to define the city. It is a place where history and modernity coexist, where the memory of past struggles is honored even as the city looks toward the future. The story of Cartagena de Indias is not just a tale of war, but a celebration of survival, endurance, and the power of a community to overcome even the greatest challenges. The Battle of Cartagena de Indias was a turning point in the struggle for control of the Americas, a clash of empires that determined the fate of a continent. Though often forgotten, the siege demonstrated the limits of imperial ambition and the strength of those who defend their homeland against overwhelming odds. As we reflect on this forgotten siege, we are reminded that history is not just a record of victories and defeats, but a tapestry of human experience. The courage of Blas de Lezo and the defenders of Cartagena, the resilience of the city, and the lessons of the past all offer insights into the challenges we face today. Thank you for joining us on this journey into history. The past may be forgotten, but its echoes remain in the stories we tell today. If you found this exploration of history insightful, there's so much more to discover. Our world is filled with stories that shaped the past and continue to influence the present. Make sure to subscribe to Historical for more in-depth looks at the battles, leaders, and decisions that changed the course of history. By subscribing, you'll stay connected with the past and better understand the world we live in today. Don't miss out on the next chapter of history. Stay informed. Stay inspired. We'll see you in the next video.